Welcome back, Leominsterites. This is your state representative, Natalie Higgins, here for the February episode of Representing Leominster, and I couldn't be more thrilled to be joined with a good friend and partner, Rep. Mike Kushmerek from Fitchburg.
Thanks so much for having me on the show.
I am excited to have you check out these new studios. I know there are new studios in the works for Fitchburg Access TV as well.
There are. Exciting for the Twin Cities, right?
We always have to one-up each other, so I'm glad that we can be in this friendly competition. But you're heading into your second term. Your first term came in during COVID.
Right.
And so you're getting to kind of really experience the start of a legislative session in a much more normal post-pandemic world. How has it been?
It's been amazing and it's been busy, right? I think going into the second term, you actually have the confidence of now knowing what to expect and where the deadlines are, when you have to file your bills by, and what comes next after that. The thousands of co-sponsorship requests to join others in supporting their bills and legislation. And so knowing that flow for the first month or two, so far has been incredibly helpful. It allowed us to anticipate and really schedule ourselves appropriately to really be able to make the most out of the first 4 or 5 weeks of session here, and it's been busy too. I think everybody goes in with a plan of how many bills they want to file, and I think like all of us, we start with a number that's lower,
and then it inches up.
And in this case, it's doubled for me. So.
It's a good place to be, and we both represent gateway cities. We work on legislation together. What are you really excited to be working on? What are some new bills that you're working on that might benefit Leominster residents as well as Fitchburg and Lunenburg?
Well, I think the fun part of a gateway community is you get to work on a little bit of everything, right? And so if you look at the full spectrum, everything from education to veterans, mental health, public health, public safety. So while there's a wide array of bills, I'm particularly excited about not only some mental health bills that we're working on and continuing the work of from last session, coming off an omnibus bill passed by the legislature last year. But I'm also really excited about some education bills, one in particular around vocational education access, and another around Chapter 90 reform. And as folks may know, Fitchburg talks a lot about its roads. That talk is fairly well deserved, and looking at maybe some tweaks we can make in both the funding formula and the funding source to really help gateway cities and every community in the Commonwealth.
I know one of the number one questions I was asked last year is, what are you going to do about roads funding? And it was like, I am ready, I am down, like, let's raise that money. We need to fix our roads much more quickly. And I don't know if folks really know the scope of how much work needs to be done. We need to invest $2.5 billion over the next 20 years just to get to a good state of repair, meaning our public roads and our transit system isn't broken.
That's right.
That's a tough place to be in. And some of it is, an old Commonwealth. We have some of the oldest infrastructure in the country, but it also really needs some serious attention.
Well, last year I think was a good example of, in terms of Chapter 90 funding. If you look at just a spreadsheet of Chapter 90 funding, it looks like it was level funded, but it wasn't. The legislature allocated more than $250 million more than the previous year. And then we increased a number of other funding sources around transportation, small bridge repair and different areas of transportation, complete streets initiatives. And so when all is said and done, we spent almost $800 million on municipal transportation infrastructure just last year alone. But I know for the average resident, you're looking around saying, where did that go?
Where did it go?
Because it doesn't go far enough. Even when we double our funding from year to year, it is barely noticeable, right? And so there's a lot of talk about what we can do, and there's a lot of needs across every municipality. Fitchburg and Leominster aren't unique here. We're in good company, and other communities have similar concerns as well.
And I'm sure you're hearing, we're heading into a very cold weekend. You're hearing about utility costs, the cost to heat our homes. One of the bills that I'm really excited we had a success on last session was the Green Act, which helps us retrofit low-income housing stock, middle-income housing stock homes in Leominster and Fitchburg. And we have $6.5 million in a pilot program that hasn't quite gotten off the ground yet, but we're really excited. We're waiting any day for that project proposal to go out. And the big news that I think we can share is it was rolled together as Governor Baker was kind of wrapping up his administration with into a total of $50 million in investments of upgrading housing stock, apartments, helping our small landlords and our homeowners really make those deep investments that help bring down their energy bills.
That's exactly. And so I'm thankful to you. This was your bill last session, and you invited me to join you, and for us to file it for the first time and have it funded in that first session. Just amazing to be able to collaborate with you and so many of the advocates, and then not only to have it passed in the first year of the session. But then to have the executive branch and Governor Baker look at it and say, "This is a great idea. We should give even more funding to it." And really, that's a shot in the arm. And now we get to look forward to how we amplify the impacts of that legislation.
And these are bills that come out of really great stories from constituents. Just how do we make sure that these programs that sound really good on paper are actually accessible to folks who live in our community? Because it's all well and good that we should be making these investments, putting solar at our homes or changing to heat pumps. But for folks in Leominster and Fitchburg, it's really hard to figure out how to do that. And as someone who owns a 100-year-old house, you need a roadmap.
Absolutely. Well, and Mass Save is great for the individual homeowner, but if you're living in a multifamily home and if you're a renter, there's no incentive there, and Mass Save doesn't really apply to you in terms of the infrastructure upgrades of the building, and often it doesn't apply to the property owner either, right? And so I think this legislation, in many ways, is like Mass Save for the small unit multifamily of not only how do we lower the cost for tenants, but how do we help those small property owners who own one or two properties really to be able to invest in their units and make them more energy efficient at the same time.
And it's great when we can have these conversations when we're doing incentives, right? It's so much better to give a carrot than a stick and really help folks figure out and learn best practices so we can scale it up across the state. We really need to be able to do that. And this is kind of that incubator to figure out what is working across the Commonwealth and how do we do it the most efficiently and effectively.
Absolutely, and starting with the gateway communities where you'll see the widest range of both needs, but also opportunities to implement new technologies and emerging technologies, and then be able to, like you said, apply it across the Commonwealth.
So we've been talking about legislation, and one of the things that we were advocating for before you arrived, and we're told we're not quite ready for this yet, is the ability to do hybrid hearings. And we would remind our colleagues in the greater Boston area that for our constituents, it's really hard to take the whole day off. The cost of travel into Boston, parking, taking the commuter rail, sitting in a hearing room, hoping to be able to get their 3 minutes of testimony. And I've been really glad that COVID kind of forced us to adopt technology in a lot of ways. It sped up telehealth, it sped up these hybrid hearings, and we just took a rules vote to pass the rules for our new legislative session in the House. And one of the things that the Speaker led on was keeping those hybrid hearings in place, seeing how many residents from across the Commonwealth were able to share their story by being able to hop into a Zoom room or a Teams room and use that technology to not disrupt their lives so much, but be able to share their input. I'm wondering how it's been for Fitchburg and Lunenburg residents to share their stories.
Absolutely. I'd say it does two things, right? It increases transparency. It allows people to have access, unprecedented access to seeing what happens in these committee meetings, the discussions that are starting at the very beginning of a policy debate, and then be able to follow it all the way through the various committees. But then also, really unprecedented access, because before, if you wanted to testify for a hearing, if you were in Fitchburg or Leominster, or North Adams.
Yeah, let's talk about the Berkshires.
That's
Impossible.
Right. For somebody in the Berkshires, that's a 3-hour drive just to get into Boston. 3-hour drive, you're spending $50 probably in gas just to get there. $30 for parking. At that point, you've got to spend money for lunch. You've taken a day off of work. You're sitting in a packed committee hearing. And you're doing that all for 2 minutes in front of the committee, and then you turn around and do it all over again. And so, for so many, that's an 8 or 10-hour day. And I don't know about you, but there's not many working folks that have the luxury of being able to take a day off and spend all of that time and money to travel into Boston for 2 minutes. And so this allows you to really, regardless of who you are or where you are, physically or otherwise in the Commonwealth, to be able to testify and not only bring your feedback and your lived experiences to the legislature, but to be able to also watch and learn and listen. And so for the first time, I think maybe ever, we just saw this unprecedented flow of Fitchburg and North Central residents participating in committee hearings and folks that came out and said, I've wanted to do this for years and I've never had that opportunity. So thank you. I hope these rules are here to stay. And I think, thanks to Speaker Mariano, I think he really listens to the members and to the residents and made this a reality.
And if you haven't gotten a chance to testify before a legislative committee and you're interested in, you can always reach out to our office and we're happy to walk you through it and help give you some tools to be able to do that. And we really had tremendous advocacy from Leominster residents who shared their own personal stories and moved policy forward. And something that I took for granted when I started in the Massachusetts legislature was we file between 6,000 and 7,000 bills at the beginning of session, and we have hearings for all of those bills. When I met colleagues from other state legislatures, not every state does that. Not every state guarantees a public hearing on a bill. Every single bill, even bills filed by constituents about issues that they individually care about, get a hearing and get airtime. And I think that's really powerful, and it's up to us to help make sure those stories get to the committee.
It's really staggering when you think about it. In the course of 10 months, there are hearings conducted on 6,000 to 7,000 bills. And as you know, there's times where it takes an entire meeting to get through 1 or 2 bills because of the number of people who want to testify. I think just last year we saw multiple hearings that lasted 10, 12, 14 hours. And people are rotating through who's chairing the meeting just so they can grab a quick cup of water and a quick lunch or dinner or second dinner, depending on how late the meeting went. But I think that's a testament to the work, I think, of the legislature this past session to really increase that access.
Looking ahead to the new session, what are you hoping to work on? What's on your mind when it comes to North Central Massachusetts, and what conversations do you want to continue or start?
Well, it's not only did we have that chance to work on a bill really targeting energy costs, but I also have a bill because Fitchburg is in Fitchburg and 3 other surrounding communities, Ashby, Townsend, and Lunenburg, have Unitil, and for decades they've been the highest utility rates in the Commonwealth. It's actually not true today, and many National Grid customers are, for the first time in a while, paying higher rates than Unitil. But we've been tracking, legislation, and when I came into office, filed that legislation that had been filed by my predecessor and now Mayor Di Natale. And this essentially makes it easier for a municipality to be able to purchase the electrical infrastructure from a private investor-owned utility, and be able to then offer municipal energy to residents. Now, I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm not saying it's cheap, because in this case, it would be in the hundreds of millions of dollars to acquire all of the infrastructure and transmission lines. But it allows a municipality both recourse if it feels that rates are too high, non-competitive, or predatory, and gives them a recourse to be able to at least put the power, no pun intended, right back in the hands of the ratepayers and the municipality. So we filed it for the first time last session, along with Senator Cronin, and so excited to now, having gone through a full session, be able to work with the chairs of telecommunications and energy be able to go back now and really hopefully be able to make some substantive progress on turning this bill into law.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think you have many more allies who understand kind of the challenges that you've been facing with Unitil and seeing opportunities for those municipal electric programs of like how they've been able to leverage their own resources to keep costs down.
We don't have to look much further than Sterling,
I know.
who has among the cheapest rates in the entire Commonwealth and the highest rates of response during critical incidents from power outages. So Sterling is a wonderful example and one we're hoping to emulate.
And another issue that we both care about, and I've been so glad to have so many folks join the North Central delegation really passionate about this, is mental health care access.
Yes.
And over the pandemic, we were able to host a number of forums across the 3 cities to really bring in voices and get an understanding as the Tri-City delegation. How do we look at this from a regional perspective? How do we make sure that Haywood Hospital, Leominster Hospital are meeting the needs of our community, and how can we affect good change to make sure when folks are in crisis, the services are there for them?
Right. I mean, I think you and I both field phone calls of these heartbreaking stories of residents, both children and elders alike, waiting in emergency rooms for days, weeks, and in some cases months, awaiting inpatient psychiatric care, known as the boarding crisis. It's heartbreaking. There's not enough beds in the Commonwealth. There's not enough units that run these and programs that run these facilities. But most importantly, there's not enough professionals that work in the field, right? And so we hear a lot about the boarding crisis, but that same problem is occurring in every aspect of mental health, behavioral health, and human services right now. And, we have a lot of work to do. And, I think you and I have talked a lot about how do we lift up the profession, ensure that there's adequate pay, attract people to the profession, and then retain them there. Because all too often, folks enter the field with the best of intentions. They love the work and they feel passionately about it. But 5 years in or 10 years in, they realize they're still in debt from their college degrees. The job is paying barely above minimum wage. Often they qualify for the same benefits and services that their clients are qualifying for. And so I think there's a lot of talk right now and a real desire to re-examine this field and how we adequately compensate people, make it a profession that people want to work in, and then in turn make sure that we expand and actually meet our residents' access needs across the board. I think at this point there's probably 2 jobs for every 1 mental health worker and human services worker. And it's really just devastating to see the effects of it. We're seeing it right now play out across, whether you're looking at, homelessness or substance use. But again, go to the ERs, and the next time, you're sitting there and wondering why it's taking so long, it's because more than half the beds are filled with people that are suffering and agonizing and waiting for days or weeks at a time for a bed that may never come. And so that's more than anything the reason for a lot of the delays in every hospital. And I think we're hypersensitive to the Haywood and Leominster and even Clinton hospital delays in the ER. But when we talk to our colleagues, even in Boston, MGH and Boston Children's are experiencing some of the same issues.
Yeah, and we're really lucky to continue to have community hospitals in our communities. We've watched so many of our colleagues lose theirs.
Right.
And figuring out how to sustain that, knowing that they might see less patients than a hospital in Boston, but that is just as important. And trying to figure out the workforce crisis. I think the new campaign that they're working on is called Enough Pay to Stay, because we're requiring these workers to have really high-level credentials, right? Often master's degrees in our teachers, our nurses, our mental health care workers, our social workers. And they're often not getting paid enough to be able to make ends meet as all of the costs are going up. And so I know that a lot of us are trying to have that conversation across industries, because DDS workers often didn't talk to elder care workers, didn't talk to frontline nurses. And they're all seeing the same thing and cycling through kind of the same workforces
Right.
and in competition with each other and able, it's great for some, they're able to leverage more pay. But when a family finally reaches out to us because they're ready to get services and they find out there's a wait list, and a wait list that is months long,
Yes.
that is heartbreaking. And they've waited, usually, months or a year until they're ready to ask for some support.
That's exactly it. And I think there's so few people who are comfortable and can easily navigate, whether it's elder care or home care or DDS. It's not easy. And it can be incredibly daunting for so many families to be able to navigate the system and provide care to a loved one. And then when they finally raise their hand ready for help, realizing that it could be, like you said, weeks, but usually months. And, that's heartbreaking. And that's not because these agencies don't care, and they're not because they're not doing a good job. They are. They're often working over capacity and long hours. It's just not enough people in the field. And, for me, that's dining room conversation. My wife is a geriatric social worker and, talks about the need every day of getting more qualified people in and then being able to keep them in. My wife once left the field early on in her career. She was burnt out 5 years after entering the workforce and went into private industry for a couple of years before returning back and realizing that was her passion and kind of switched concentrations within the field of social work. But it's heartbreaking to lose people. And, she's a perfect example of wanted to go and get her master's in social work. It would have put her further into debt, and it wasn't worth it for her in her circumstance. So she got an MBA instead. And fortunately, she's been able to stay in the field. They didn't lose a good worker.
Right.
But we have to be really cognizant of what are the things we can do to incentivize people to not only stay in the workforce, but then make sure that, like you said, that we're paying them adequately for the work that they're doing. In some cases, there's a lot of secondary trauma that these folks encounter. They don't get to just, shut the laptop at the end of the day and go home. People's worst days are their days every single day, and they're consumed by it. And these are people who are highly empathetic. That's why they went into the field, so they carry it. And so there's a lot we need to do. And I think the demand that's occurred throughout, the pandemic, while it's been scary to see these wait times and really underscored the mental health crisis as well, I have optimism that it's brought new attention and shed light on the situation that's been going on for far too long. So now's our opportunity to really address it in a systemic way.
And so we're coming up at the end of our show, and one of the questions I always love to ask my guests, especially elected officials, is for folks who are looking to get a little more involved and have something that they're really passionate about advocating for, do you have any advice on how you started advocating and how you lifted up your voice, ways for them to be able to share their perspective more effectively?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's funny. I was just sharing this with somebody the other day. The first time I ever got involved, and the first time I was ever encouraged to stay involved, was a joint committee of the Higher Education Committee of the Legislature when they went to Fitchburg State, and I testified as a student, and it was empowering for me. And I remember Rep. DiNatale and Senator Flanagan at the time were like, "You're really good. You should do this more often. You'll be here one day." And I remember feeling so empowered, and it stuck with me. And ultimately, that drove me to raise my hand at the community level and contact a city councilor and ask to get involved. So this the same thing. Whether you're considering testifying on a bill, you're passionate about a subject matter, or you're just curious about something that's happening at the state level, contacting your state representative or state senator, or if it's an ultra local issue, whether it's a pothole or a street light in your neighborhood or anything else. Pick up the phone, call your city councilor, call your mayor, get involved, ask a question. You may be surprised by how much you're interested and passionate about the subject matter.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And so thank you for tuning in. If you need to get in touch with our office, you always know that you can call us at 978-227-5278. You can shoot us an email at natalie.higgins@mahouse.gov. And we still have those weekly office hours by appointments, Monday evenings and Friday mornings. So please reach out. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you in March.